That's Argent and Hold Your Head Up, selected by our guest Rick Wakeman. You love that one.
I do. I always thought it was just a great track, works as an album track with a very extended solo, and was a great single. Rod's a really good friend of mine, and I think his organ playing was always very underestimated. He's really good. He's a great player, and don't think he really ever got the recognition that he deserved as, you know, his technique and the way he played. And the solo on Hold Your Head Up is one of my favourite organ solos of all time. I think it's brilliant. I've told him too.
Well, I'm sure he was pleased to hear that.
He wasn't, because I said he was going to have to buy me lunch for saying it.
I think the last time I saw you, we were queuing up to get into Santa's grotto.
We were indeed. We were indeed, with various grandchildren and things and that in tow. How many have you got now?
2.
I've got 10 now since then.
Have you really?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I hate Christmas. But you're right, yeah.
How many ex-wives have you got?
3 ex-wives, and obviously a very happy current one. But that's right, we just got off the train, hadn't we?
We had.
Yeah, the little train.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure who looked the most miserable, you or me.
Wasn't very warm.
It was freezing.
Yeah. You could. Have you ever played Father Christmas? One of his helpers? You could do well.
Do you know what? I did do Father Christmas once. When my daughter Gemma, who's now, 33, 34, she was at a little school in Camberley, and she was, about 4, something like that, 4 or 5. And I dropped the kids off at school at Christmas time, and the headmistress came out, and she said, "Oh, Mr. Wegg, we've got a terrible problem." And I said, "What?" So she said, "Santa is not going to be able to come." I said, "What?" She said, "Well, Santa's due today to see all the children." I said, "Oh, right." She said, "But Mr. whoever it was who normally plays Santa has got a nasty cold and won't be with us. And we're desperate." She said, "You obviously don't work during the day." I said, "Well, I do, actually, you know." She said, "Well, you know what I mean, you don't go off to work in the night." She said, "Would you be Father Christmas for the children?" And I thought, well, yeah, all right. I said, "Oh, well." So I dressed up as Father Christmas, sat in this classroom, and the kids, all about 5, came in one by one. You know, you do them, ho, 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 hello. What would you like me to bring you for Christmas this year? And you go, "I'd like a Ferrari." "Well, you ain't going to get one." You know, that kind of thing. You had all of it. But they were all like happy, smiley kids and thrilled to see Santa. And I was quite getting into the part. Then my daughter Gemma came in, screamed. Screamed. "What would you like for?" Screamed. So I went home, and eventually she was brought back home from school at 4 o'clock or whatever. Came in, and I said, "Oh, how was school today, Gemma?" She said, "Not very nice." And I said, "Why is that?" She said, "Santa Claus came." I said, "Oh, did you like Santa?" She said, "No, he smelt." I went, "Right, okay." I thought, leave it there. And it was quite a few years later that I said to you, "Do you remember that time when Santa came?" And I told her it was. She didn't believe me for long. She went, "No, it wasn't you. He stank." I said, "No, it wasn't me." There you go. That was the only time I was ever Santa.
So at the beginning of the 70s, you kind of rescued the Strawbs. They were sort of on the point of breaking up, maybe, or they'd lost direction a bit.
I think the thing that was interesting, and I think Dave Cousins has to have a lot of credit, because they were a folk band and doing very well. I mean, at one stage there were 2 acoustic guitars, him and Tony Hooper. They had a stand-up double bass player called Ron Chesterman, and they also had a cellist. So it was a sort of an interesting sort of folk band, and Dave's songs were lovely, the ones that he wrote and that Tony Hooper wrote. And I did quite a lot of sessions for them, just playing the piano, for Folk on Friday, which was a big programme on Radio 2 way back in the sort of the late 60s. And we became good friends, and then Dave asked me to go around his house one day. He said, I just want to play some tunes to you and think. I went, okay. So I went round his house and we went through these tunes. I thought, oh no, he's doing all these tunes. And he said, we've got to move on. And I said, what's the royal we? What do you mean to me? He said, well, we've got to change. We can't carry on as the way we are, because we're just lagging behind things that are going. And he said, I think that we need to become electric in some way. And I went, okay, go on then. And he said, I'm not suggesting we turn into a complete group with drums and whatever, but if we had some percussion, an electric bass, we ditch the stand-up bass and we ditch the cello, you come in on piano and maybe get an organ or something like that, or an electric piano, and we try and move forward in a semi-electric way, because we can do more with the songs and change the writing. What do you think? And I said, well, that sounds good. He said, but it means you join in the band. I said, I'd love to. I was only 20, and I said, that would be fantastic. So I joined Straubs, saved up my £18 a week we got, saved up my pennies, and bought a second-hand little Hammond L102 that was falling apart, but I was paying like £6 a week or something like that. And by the time you added my £8 a week rent, there wasn't much left. But it didn't matter. And we used to share a van with a band called Forevermore, which became the Average White Band. And they had a roadie called Gordon who had a green Transit. And often or not then, anybody who owned a Transit van could instantly become a roadie, because all it was humping and things like that. So we shared Gordon. And so we threw all the gear in the back and went out, and we moved out of the folk clubs, who were horrified when we walked in with Hammond organ. And
it's like the Bob Dylan moment.
Oh, it was exactly that.
Yeah.
Absolutely that. I mean, when John Ford, because we brought in John Ford and Richard Hudson from a band called Elmer Gantry's Velvet Opera, and we brought them in, and John played a great kind of bass, because it was a semi-slap, but it gave that impression of percussion. And Hud just had loads of percussion instruments, congas, bongos, cymbals, and it worked really, really well. But as I say, the folk clubs, they were not keen, when we walked in with all of that stuff. So we moved on to what was lovingly known as, I suppose, then the college circuit, which was great, and started playing college dates and going down very well. Then I suppose the breakthrough for Straws came when we did Queen Elizabeth Hall, the QE Hall, in 1970. And we got great reviews, and suddenly we escalated up a little bit higher, and we had an album called Just a Collection of Antiques and Curios, and that went into the sort of the top 30 in the chart, so we were absolutely thrilled. And then it grew, and then we did a second album called From a Witchwood, and that had some great songs on it, but it also had a few what I call pop songs, and I could see that the band was edging towards possibly becoming a bit of a pop band.
What, like Part of the Union? You were out by then, weren't you?
I was out by then. I often say that Part of the Union was a hit because I wasn't there. Because, I'm firmly convinced if I'd have been there, I wouldn't never have done it. It would never have been a hit.
Let's play something you do like from Straubs.
Yeah, go on then. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. There's a few tracks that I really love to bits, but Glimpse of Heaven will always be one of my big favourites. Dave wrote the lyrics on the cliff at Seaton in Devon, looking over the hillside and looking over the sea and the cliffs. I've actually sat there and played it, and it is absolutely beautiful. So it's a piece that I've always been very fond of.
That's the Hands Back from an album called Journey to the Centre of the Earth, a #1 album for our guest Rick Wakeman.
Yeah, it was a great album. The record company didn't want it; they hated it.
Just shows how much they know, doesn't it?
They said they'd never sell a copy. It's one piece. You don't sell that. It was quite funny when they gave me my platinum disc down at Meudon Festival in France. The head of the company, who Hastelad's not the head now, stood up and in front of all the press and said, "We're very proud to give Rick this platinum disc, and every now and then something lands on your desk and you know you've got something really special and really want to go along with, so here." And I'm looking at the side stunned, and I walked up, and as I walked up he walked off, turned sideways to me, and "I will clean this up," and just went, "Don't you dare." And I went up and said, "It's really lovely to find your niche with a record company that understands what it is that you're doing." And we came off, and he laughed and said, "That's great, Rick." He said, "What's next?" I said, "King Arthur." He went, "I won't even ask." To be fair, all the bosses back at that time, people like Armour Ertegun in America, people like Jerry Moss, people like that who were the head of the companies, they owned up. We don't understand half this, but does it matter? Because there's a whole generation of people who really, really love it. So it's our job to make sure it's presented to them. It's not down to us to say, "Oh, you have to listen to this kind of thing," or "You have to listen to that kind of thing." That only changed really at the end of the 70s into the 80s, when Ruggles decided that they knew better than the musicians. I mean, a little story, the wonderful author James Herbert, sadly no longer with us, who wrote The Rats and had huge, massive selling books. James was a great friend of mine, and we talked one day. We were in a restaurant in London, and he said, "Where are you off to?" I said, "Oh, well, I'm off to meet the record company head today." He said, "What about?" I said, "A new album." "Well, we'll argue." He said, "Why?" I said, "Oh, they'll say they want at least 6 tracks that are 3 minutes long. They'll even sort of, suggest certain tempos and certain people to be in it and what to do. And I said, it's nuts, because I've got my own ideas of what I want to do. But they've got this whole thing about, we've got to get radio play, we've got to do this, to get press, we've got to do this. And I said, it's really depressing. And he said, is it really like that? And I said, yeah. He said, Rick, he said, if I went into my publisher and said, right, I'm about to start on the new book, he said, and my publisher said to me, oh, that's great, James, really looking forward to it. Oh, by the way, make sure you have a plane crash in it, because that's really hot to trot at the moment. And, a couple of murders, that would be really good. And some racism would be great, because that's hot on the moment. And then some surprises. He said, I'd say, excuse me, who's writing this book, you or me? Your job is to sell it. My job is to write it. You are buying my expertise to write a book, and I'm, in essence, buying your expertise on how to present it to the public. And that's how record companies used to be.
Let's go back to the days when it was like that.
Yeah.
And Yes we're a band that were allowed to kind of do their own thing, whether people understood it or not in the record company.
That's very true.
And
I was just going to say, I can remember record execs coming down to sessions and sitting there and talk about they'd come from the home for the chronically bewildered, and they'd just go, sounds great.
Yeah, great, lads. Well, let's play the song that got you back into Yes. This is Wondrous Stories. That's Yes and Wondrous Stories, featuring our guest Rick Wakeman, who's been in and out of Yes, a bit like Frank Sinatra comebacks, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Somebody once said that my association with Yes was a bit like Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, that couldn't live with each other all the time, but couldn't live without each other all the time. And I said, well, that's fair enough, as long as I can be Richard Burton and not Elizabeth Taylor.
Yes. Looking back on the 70s and some of the photographs and stuff,
yeah.
I mean, when punk came along, they wanted to do away with all that pomp and grandiose stuff that was going on.
Yeah.
And when you look at yourself in great cloaks and long hair and everything, did you go over the top at all, do you think?
I hope so, because that was half the fun. I mean, I still, when I'm doing the rock shows, so we're out with Anderson, Rabin and Wakeman at the moment, and I put the capes go on. I mean, it's fantastic. It's an important part of an era and the present day. And yes, I think we did go over the top, but that's what it was all about. And I was accused of hating punk, which was not true, because there was a lot of bands that I really liked. I mean, the Jam, Clash, I really liked. And people forget sometimes that I was the guy who discovered the Tubes. I took the Tubes to A&M and signed them and did all that and brought them over.
The West Coast American band.
They were fantastic.
Yeah.
Don't
Touch Me There. Do you
that's
remember
it,
that?
yeah. White punks on. Well, Fee Weber was still a great friend of mine. But when people say to me, oh, it was over the top, it was pompous, yeah, it was. But I loved it. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's been the same throughout musical history. It's just at the right place at the right time. And I don't see anything wrong with giving people a choice of what they want to listen to. I love all that pomp.
So the head teacher of your daughter's school way back, she thought that you weren't working during the day, but actually, during the 70s, you were one of the most in-demand keyboard session players. You were doing hundreds of sessions. And trying to be in bands at the same time and stuff.
Do you know what it was? When I look back, people say, why did you do that? It was because I could. I just loved music. I loved music from the age of 5. And I played in all sorts of different bands throughout my teens and before my teens. And if there was any chance to play, I would do it. If somebody said, there's a little band playing down at the social club or the church club, I'd be down there like a shot. So when the chance came to do lots of sessions and work for different people, and a lot of that stemmed from the BBC, because as well as anybody else, when Radio 1 first started, there was a thing called needle time. There was only so many records they could play. The rest, they did a deal with the MU that had to be some live music. So they needed bands to go in, session bands to go in and record all of these things. And I did hundreds of these down at Maida Vale Studios. And I'd be going in there, I was only, 16, 17 years old, and I'd be going in there, and there would be Jimmy Page or John Entwistle or Mooney, or there was all these great musicians who just went on because they wanted to play, and we would do all these different tracks for Jimmy Young, because he was on Radio 1 then, as you know, and Tony Brandon and all the guys. So there's all those sessions, and that led on to doing big sessions for big artists, and I just wanted to play all the time.
You did an awful lot for Al Stewart, Cat Stevens, and famously David Bowie. And I know you've told a story 100 times, really, about playing the piano on Life on Mars and other tracks on Hunky Dory. But it was the famous piano at the Trident, where the sort of hammers had got a bit hard.
That's right.
Did anybody sort of step up and say, "Here, these pads are all worn out here, we better replace them"?
It was a very strange thing. The Trident piano became very famous because it is a fact of life when a piano is restored or new. The hammers have to sort of blend in, and it comes to a moment when you can say that they're optimum as to the sound that they give, with brightness and evenness. And the Trident piano became really, really famous. I was told later that they never actually owned it. It was rented from chapels, but everybody wanted to use that particular piano. So, I mean, I did loads of stuff there, not just for David. Elton John recorded there. He loved that piano. And it became really famous. And in fact, when Trident closed down, a lot of people had a little look to see if they could buy the piano. But the interesting thing was, by the time Trident closed, the piano was knackered. It had gone too far the other way, no longer had the great sound.
Just a final question. I mean, when you were on tour with Yes, you had 5 keyboards. I think you kind of started the trend of piling the keyboards on top of each other.
Yeah, I actually had...
So, what is your favourite keyboard to play?
Piano.
Piano.
Piano, far and away the piano, because the piano is still the only instrument, really, that you can feel what you want to come out almost going down your arm, your fingers, and when you touch the note, you actually have complete control over how that note sounds, how the hammer system works, and there is no other instrument that can do that for you. So, yeah, if it was Desert Island Discs, and what could I take? It'd be a piano.
Rick, thanks for coming by.
Thanks ever so much. Pleasure as always.
Great to see you.
See you at the grotto.
Let's hear the tingles down the arm, going into the fingers, as it was heard at Trident Studios when you recorded this song with David Bowie.
It's a god-awful small affair to the girl with the mousy hair, but her mummy is yelling no, and her daddy has told her to go.